3 men tried, and the dust remembers every one of them, she said, her voice calm as the wind moving through dry grass. The crowd shifted, boots grinding into the hard earth, a low murmur rolling like distant thunder. Noon sun burned overhead, casting sharp shadows across the open yard, where the bull stood alone behind the wooden rail, breathing slow, heavy, watching. It was a massive animal, near 1,800 pounds, muscle rippling under a hide marked by old scars and rope lines that told stories no one here bothered to understand. Flies hovered in the heat. Leather creaked. Somewhere, a horse stamped impatiently. And in the center of it all, Niyeli stood, still and unyielding, her dark eyes fixed not on the men, but on the silence between them. "Tame him," she repeated, softer now, almost like a truth spoken only to the air, "and I will marry you." Laughter followed, sharp, careless, the kind that comes easy when fear hides behind pride. A few men stepped forward before, loud voices, quick hands, each one certain strength meant control. Each one stepping back slower than they approached, their confidence left somewhere in the dust. The bull never rushed. It never needed to. It simply stood, head low, eyes steady, as if waiting for someone to finally listen. Ethan Cole watched from the edge of the crowd, hat pulled low, fingers resting loosely against his belt, saying nothing. No one noticed him at first. He wasn't the biggest man there, nor the loudest, nor the kind who needed attention to feel certain of himself. He just stood, quiet, as the wind shifted and carried the smell of dry earth and animal sweat across the yard. When he finally stepped forward, it wasn't sudden. It was inevitable. A few heads turned. Someone scoffed. Another one. A man muttered under his breath, already expecting the same ending. Ethan didn't answer, didn't even look their way. His eyes stayed on the bull, steady, patient, as if reading something written beneath the surface. Niyeli noticed that. The way he moved without hurry. The way he didn't square his shoulders like he had something to prove. He stopped a few yards from the gate, resting his hand on the rough wood, feeling its worn edges beneath his fingers. "You understand the terms," she said, watching him closely now. He gave a small nod. No smile. No challenge. Just acknowledgement. The gate creaked open. The sound stretched in the heat, long and deliberate, like the moment before a storm decides whether to break. The bull lifted its head slightly, not startled, not threatened, just aware. Dust stirred around its hooves. Ethan stepped inside. No rope in his hands. No tools. No rush. Behind him, the crowd leaned forward, waiting for something loud, something fast, something they could recognize as strength. But what they saw instead was stillness. Ethan stopped about 20 feet away, close enough to be seen, far enough to give space. He didn't raise his arms. Didn't call out. He just stood there, breathing steady, eyes soft but unwavering. The bull shifted its weight, a low exhale escaping its nostrils, as if measuring him the same way. Time stretched thin. The kind of silence that makes men uncomfortable settled over the yard. Niyeli's gaze narrowed, something unreadable flickering beneath her calm expression. Because for the first time, someone wasn't trying to tame the bull. Someone was waiting for it to speak. The bull did not charge. It did not retreat. It simply watched, its dark eyes fixed on the man who refused to move like the others. Ethan stood there, the sun pressing down on his shoulders, the dry wind tugging lightly at the brim of his hat. He could feel the weight of every gaze behind him, the restless shifting of boots, the quiet impatience of men who had come for spectacle, not silence. But he did not turn. He did not acknowledge them. Because out here, noise meant nothing. Only presence did. The bull exhaled slowly, a low, steady sound, and took a single step forward. Dust lifted beneath its hoof, drifting in the light like fine powder. A murmur rippled through the crowd, subtle, uncertain. This was different. Niyeli felt it too. She crossed her arms, her posture unchanged, but her attention sharpened, narrowing entirely on the space between the man and the animal. Most men filled silence with force. This one let it breathe. Ethan shifted his weight, just enough to stay grounded, his boots settling deeper into the dirt. His hands remained open at his sides, fingers relaxed, not reaching, not demanding. He had seen this before. Not the same animal, not the same place, but the same look in the eyes of something pushed too far, something that had learned to expect pain before understanding. The rope marks along the bull's neck caught the sunlight, faint lines etched into thick hide, stories of control forced too quickly, too harshly. Ethan's gaze softened, not with pity, but with recognition. The bull stepped again, closer now, its head slightly lowered, not in threat, but in caution. It was measuring him, testing the space he held. The air grew tight, like a held breath stretching too long. Someone behind the fence shifted loudly, and the bull's ear flicked back for a brief second, its muscles tightening just enough to show how quickly things could change. But Ethan did not react. He did not flinch. He stayed exactly where he was, as steady as a fence post that had stood through 100 storms. Niyeli noticed that more than anything. Not courage, not stubbornness. Control. The kind that does not come from force, but from knowing when not to move. Another step, now 10 feet apart. The bull's breathing grew heavier, visible in the rise and fall of its chest. Ethan could hear it clearly, could feel the rhythm settle into something almost predictable. He matched it without thinking, his own breath slowing, deepening, aligning with the quiet language no one had taught him, but life had shown him enough times to understand. The crowd grew quieter. The laughter had faded completely now, replaced by something unfamiliar. Uncertainty. A man near the front leaned forward, squinting as if trying to find the trick, the moment where this would break into something they recognized. But it did not come. Instead, Ethan took a single step forward. Slow, measured, not closing the distance, just sharing it. The bull's head lifted slightly, its gaze locking onto his. For a brief moment, the world seemed to narrow down to that single line between them. No crowd, no challenge, just two beings deciding what the next moment would become. Niyeli's fingers tightened slightly against her arm, because now she knew. This was no longer about whether he could tame the bull. It was about whether he would choose to. The distance between them held, fragile and exact, like a line drawn in dust that neither one rushed to cross. The bull's eyes did not leave Ethan, dark and steady, carrying something deeper than simple instinct. It shifted its head slightly, and the sunlight caught the old rope scar again, that faint, worn line circling its neck like a memory that refused to fade. Ethan saw it clearly now, not just the mark, but what it meant. Hands that had pulled too hard, voices that had shouted instead of listened, force used where patience should have been. He let out a slow breath, almost silent, and lowered his gaze just enough to soften it, not in submission, but in respect. That small change traveled through the air like a whisper. The bull felt it. Its stance loosened, just a fraction, the tension in its shoulders easing as if something unseen had shifted. Behind the fence, a man leaned closer, squinting, trying to understand why nothing had broken yet, why no sudden movement had turned this into the chaos they expected. But the chaos did not come. Instead, Ethan lifted his hand slowly, palm open, fingers relaxed, stopping well before the space between them closed. He did not reach for the bull. He offered presence, nothing more. The bull exhaled again, longer this time, a deep, rolling breath that stirred the dust at its feet. Its ears tilted forward, then back, reading the man the way it had learned to read danger, searching for the hidden edge that always came before pain. It did not find it. Niyeli watched without blinking. Her posture remained still, but her focus narrowed further, drawn to the subtle changes most would miss. The way the animal's breathing slowed. The way its weight shifted from readiness into something closer to curiosity. This was not control. This was something rarer. Ethan took another step, closing the distance to just a few feet now. Close enough to feel the warmth of the animal's body in the dry air. Close enough to hear the quiet rhythm of its breath without effort. Still, he did not rush. His hand remained where it was, steady, patient, letting the bull decide. For a long moment, nothing moved. Time stretched thin again, pressing against every person watching, demanding stillness from those who were not used to it. Then, slowly, almost reluctantly, the bull leaned forward. Not a challenge, not a charge, a question. Its head lowered just enough that the distance between them disappeared. And for the first time, it was not the man stepping closer. It was the animal choosing to meet him. Ethan's fingers finally made contact, light, deliberate, resting against the broad, warm forehead. No force, no grip, just touch. The bull did not pull away. It did not react with fear or resistance. It simply stood there, breathing, as if the tension it had carried for so long no longer had a reason to remain. A hush fell over the yard, deeper than before, the kind that settles when something undeniable happens in front of people who were certain they understood the world. Niyeli took a slow step forward, her eyes never leaving the two figures standing in that fragile, quiet connection. She studied the way Ethan's hand rested there, the absence of dominance, the absence of demand. And in that moment, she understood what no one else had. This had never been about strength. It had never been about proving anything to a crowd. It was about whether a man could stand in front of something broken and choose not to break it further. The bull's breath warmed Ethan's hand, steady now, no longer sharp or guarded, but slow, almost searching, as if it had finally found a place where it did not need to brace against what might come next. Ethan did not move his fingers, did not press or guide. He simply let them rest there, feeling the quiet rhythm beneath thick hide, feeling the life in it without trying to shape it. Dust settled around their boots, the air softening in a way that felt unfamiliar to the men watching, as if the world itself had decided to pause and reconsider what it had always believed. A hat shifted somewhere behind the fence, then stilled. No one spoke. No one laughed anymore. Niyeli stepped closer, the faint sound of her boots against dry ground carrying farther than it should have in the silence. Her eyes traced every detail, from the relaxed line of the animal's back to the calm in Ethan's stance, searching for something hidden, something false, something that would prove this was still a contest. But there was none. The bull lowered its head slightly, not forced, not pushed, just allowed. Ethan followed the movement with care, keeping his hand where it had been invited, not where he wanted it to be. That difference, small as it seemed, changed everything. A breeze moved through the yard, carrying the scent of leather and sun-warmed earth, brushing past them like a quiet witness. Ethan's other hand lifted slowly, not to take control, but to reach for the old rope still hanging loose along the animal's neck. The fibers were worn, rough against his fingers, telling their own story of strain and resistance. He paused before touching it, giving the bull time to respond. The animal shifted its weight, but did not pull away. So Ethan gently eased the rope, loosening its hold, letting it fall away from the scar it had carved over time. The movement was careful, deliberate, like removing something that had never truly belonged there. A soft exhale left the bull, deeper than before, its body settling further, tension slipping away piece by piece. Niyeli saw that, and something in her expression changed, subtle but undeniable. This was not a man winning over an animal. This was a man giving something back. Ethan let the rope drop fully, the end of it landing in the dust with a quiet thud that echoed louder than it should have. He did not pick it up again. He did not look at the crowd. He kept his focus where it had always been, on the life in front of him, on the trust that had been offered and could be taken away just as easily. The bull lifted its head again, slower this time, its eyes no longer searching for danger, but holding a calm that had not been there before. It stood beside him now, not as something conquered, but as something understood. A man near the fence swallowed hard, shifting his stance as if unsure where to place his hands, as if the rules he had lived by no longer fit the moment in front of him. Niyeli took another step forward, closing the distance until she stood just outside the space they had created. Her voice, when it came, was low, steady, but carried through the yard with a weight that silenced even the wind. "You did not break him," she said. Ethan did not turn, did not answer right away. His hand rested one last moment against the bull's forehead before he let it fall to his side. "He was never meant to be broken," he replied quietly. The words settled into the air, simple, unforced, but they stayed there, pressing against every thought the crowd had brought with them. Niyeli studied him, not with challenge now, but with something deeper, something closer to recognition. Because the test she had set was never about strength, never about control. It was about whether a man could stand in a place built on taking and choose to give instead. The rope lay in the dust, still and forgotten, its purpose ended in a way no one had expected. For a long moment, no one moved. The kind of silence that settles after something shifts, something quiet but permanent, pressed down on the yard. Ethan stepped back, just one pace, giving the animal its space again. The bull did not follow, did not resist, It simply remained where it stood, calm, grounded, as if the world around it had finally stopped asking it to be something else. A man near the fence cleared his throat, the sound awkward, out of place, like he had forgotten how to speak without filling the air with noise. Another adjusted his hat, eyes narrowing, searching for the part they had missed, the hidden trick that would explain what they had just seen. But there was no trick. Niyeli's gaze lingered on Ethan, studying him with a depth that went beyond curiosity now. Her arms slowly uncrossed, the rigid line of her stance softening just enough to reveal something unspoken beneath it. She had seen strong men before. Many of them. Men who believed strength meant taking, holding, proving. This was not that. You could have forced him, she said quietly, her voice carrying across the yard without effort. It was not a question. It was an observation. Ethan glanced briefly at the rope on the ground, then back at the bull. I could have tried, he answered, his tone even, without pride or regret. But he already knew what that felt like. The words settled deeper than the dust, reaching places the crowd did not often visit. A few men shifted their weight again, less certain now, less eager to meet each other's eyes. Because what they had come to witness was not a contest anymore. It had turned into something else entirely, something that did not fit inside the rules they understood. Niyeli stepped forward, closing the final distance, her presence now part of the quiet space Ethan had created. She stood beside the bull, her hand resting lightly along its shoulder, her touch familiar, respectful. The animal did not react. It did not need to. This was never about the bull, she said after a moment, her voice lower now, meant more for him than for the crowd. Ethan looked at her then, really looked, not as a challenge, not as a prize, but as someone who had been watching all along. I figured that, he replied softly. A faint breeze moved between them, lifting a strand of her dark hair, carrying with it the scent of sage and sun-warmed earth. Niyeli's eyes held his, steady, searching, but no longer guarded in the same way. Men come here to prove they are not afraid, she continued. They think fear is something you fight. She paused, glancing briefly at the rope in the dirt, then back at him. But fear listens, just like he did. Ethan nodded once, slow, understanding more than the words themselves. Behind them, the crowd remained quiet, no longer certain where they stood in this moment, no longer sure what part they played. The space that had once belonged to noise and challenge now belonged to something else, something heavier, harder to dismiss. Niyeli drew a small breath, her shoulders settling as if a decision she had carried for a long time had finally reached its end. You met the terms, she said, her voice steady again, but different now, no longer a challenge thrown into the wind. It carried weight, meaning, the kind that did not need to be raised to be heard. Ethan did not smile, did not step forward. He simply stood there, the same as before, calm, grounded, unchanged by what had just been placed in front of him. And in that stillness, something shifted again. Because for the first time, it was not the bull being tested. And it was not the man either. It was the space between two worlds, waiting to see what would happen next. The words hung in the air longer than they should have, not because they were loud, but because no one was ready for what they meant. The wind moved again, slow and steady, brushing across the yard as if it, too, was waiting. Ethan shifted his weight slightly, his boots pressing deeper into the dirt, but he did not step closer to her. He did not reach. His eyes moved briefly from Niyeli to the bull, then back again, as if making sure nothing in that quiet moment had been misunderstood. Terms are easy to meet, he said after a pause, his voice calm, measured. It is what comes after that matters. A few men at the fence exchanged glances, uneasy, as though the ground beneath them had changed without warning. They had expected celebration, or at least a clear ending. A winner, a claim, something they could recognize. But this felt unfinished in a way they could not explain. Niyeli tilted her head slightly, studying him again, this time not as someone being tested, but as someone who had just answered a question she had never spoken out loud. Most men would have taken what was offered, she said quietly. Her hand rested against the bull's shoulder, fingers moving lightly along its hide, grounding herself in something familiar. Ethan let out a slow breath, the corner of his jaw tightening just enough to show the weight behind his next words. Most men think something offered is something owed. He glanced at the rope again, still lying where it had fallen, then lifted his gaze back to her. I do not. The silence deepened. It was no longer tense. It was heavy, the kind of quiet that asks something of everyone inside it. Niyeli's eyes softened, just a fraction, though her posture remained straight, unyielding in its own way. She stepped forward, closing the space between them until only a few feet remained, close enough that the dust between their boots no longer felt like distance. You turned away from what others would have fought to claim, she said. Why? The question was simple. The answer was not. Ethan did not respond right away. He looked past her for a brief moment, out toward the open land beyond the yard, where the horizon stretched wide and empty, where choices were made without witnesses and lived with long after. Because not everything meant to be earned is meant to be taken, he said finally, his voice low, steady. Some things they decide for themselves. Niyeli held his gaze, searching, not for weakness, but for truth. And she found it, not in his words, but in the way he stood. The way he had stood the entire time. Without demand. Without expectation. The bull shifted slightly beside her, its presence now quiet, almost unnoticed, no longer the center of attention, but a part of the moment that had shaped everything. Behind them, the crowd remained still, uncertain whether to stay or leave, as if stepping away would mean missing something important, something they could not yet name. Niyeli drew in a slow breath, her shoulders rising and falling with it, and for the first time since she had spoken the challenge, her voice changed. It lost its edge. Then you understand, she said softly. This was never about choosing a husband. Ethan nodded once, not surprised. No, he replied. It was about seeing who would choose not to own what they do not understand. The words settled between them, quiet but final. Niyeli looked at him for a long moment, then turned her gaze briefly to the crowd, to the men who had laughed, who had watched, who had expected something simpler. When she looked back at Ethan, something had shifted in her eyes. Not surrender, not victory, something closer to respect. Then the choice is no longer mine alone, she said. And this time, when the silence returned, it did not feel empty. It felt like the beginning of something neither side had ever truly considered before. The wind carried her words across the yard, and this time, no one tried to interrupt them. Not a single laugh, not a single careless remark. Just men standing still, caught in something they did not expect. To witness. Ethan did not step forward when she spoke. He did not step back either. He remained where he was, grounded, as if the decision she spoke of was not something he could reach for, only something he could meet if it came to him. Niyeli turned slightly, her gaze moving past him, toward the open land stretching beyond the fence, where the horizon blurred into heat and distance. For a moment, she said nothing. Her hand rested against the bull's shoulder, fingers still, as if feeling the quiet strength beneath it. Then she spoke again, softer now, but with a weight that carried farther than before. My people do not give away what belongs to them, she said. And we do not take what does not choose us. The words settled into the dust, simple, but unshakable. Ethan nodded once, his expression unchanged, but his eyes sharper now, aware that this moment had moved beyond anything that could be called a challenge. Then you already know the answer, he replied quietly. Niyeli turned back to him, her eyes holding his, searching for hesitation, for doubt, for anything that might break the stillness he carried so naturally. She did not find it. Instead, she found something far more difficult to face. A man who did not need the outcome to define him. Behind them, one of the men at the fence shifted forward, unable to hold back any longer. So what happens now? He called out, his voice uncertain, lacking the confidence it had carried before. The question hung in the air, but it did not belong to him. It belonged to the space between two people who had yet to decide what this moment would become. Niyeli did not look at the man who spoke. She did not look at the crowd at all. Her focus remained on Ethan, steady, unwavering. Now, she said slowly, we see if you understand what you have refused. Ethan let out a quiet breath, the kind that comes when a path becomes clear, even if it leads somewhere unknown. I did not refuse it, he answered. I just did not take it. The difference mattered. She could hear it. Niyeli took one step closer, closing the last space between them, her presence calm, grounded, but no longer distant. The bull shifted behind her, then settled again, as if the moment had already passed its test. Then do not take it, she said, her voice barely above the wind now. Stand here, and let it come to you, if it will. Ethan held her gaze, the silence stretching once more, but this time it felt different. Not like a question, not like a test. Something closer to an answer waiting to be acknowledged. He did not reach for her. He did not move to claim anything that had been spoken. He simply stood, the same as before, patient, unshaken. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, Niyeli's stance softened. Not in surrender, not in yielding, but in recognition. Because for the first time, she was not standing in front of a man trying to prove himself worthy. She was standing in front of someone who had already chosen who he was, regardless of what she decided. The crowd behind them remained silent, no longer part of the moment, no longer shaping it. This was not theirs to witness anymore. It belonged to something quieter, something deeper than the noise they had brought with them. Niyeli lowered her hand from the bowl, letting it fall to her side. Then, without breaking eye contact, she stepped forward into Ethan's space, not as a challenge, not as a prize, but as a choice made freely, without pressure, without demand. And in that moment, the dust did not rise, the wind did not shift, nothing dramatic marked the change. But everyone felt it. Because out here, the rarest thing was not strength. It was someone who knew when not to use it. The space between them closed without sound, without force, without the kind of moment the crowd had been waiting for. Niyeli stood close enough now to see the fine dust along Ethan's collar, the faint crease at the edge of his eyes from years spent under open sky, the stillness that had not left him once. He did not move to meet her. He did not step away. He simply remained, as he had from the beginning, letting the moment exist without trying to shape it. The bull shifted behind her, turning slightly, no longer watching them as something separate, but as part of the same quiet ground it stood on. The rope remained where it had fallen, half covered by dust, already losing its place in the story. A long breath passed through Niyeli's chest, slow, measured, as if she had carried it for years and was only now deciding to release it. "You stood when others pushed," she said, her voice low, steady, meant for him alone even though everyone could hear it. "You waited when others demanded." Ethan's gaze did not waver. "I listened," he answered simply. The words settled deeper than anything spoken before, not because they were strong, but because they were enough. Niyeli studied him for a long moment, her eyes tracing the quiet certainty in his stance, the absence of need in the way he held himself. Most men filled silence with something, words, movement, control. He had filled it with nothing, and somehow that had carried more weight than anything else. Behind them, the crowd had stopped shifting entirely, as if even the smallest movement would break what they were witnessing. A man lowered his head slightly, not in defeat, but in something closer to understanding he did not yet have words for. Niyeli's hand lifted slowly, not toward him, but toward the space between them, pausing there, suspended, as if asking a question without speaking it. Ethan did not reach for it. He did not close the distance. He waited. The wind brushed past them again, softer now, carrying the faint scent of sage and sun-warmed leather, moving through the yard like a quiet acknowledgement. And then, without urgency, without pressure, Niyeli placed her hand in his. The contact was light, deliberate, not a claim, not a surrender, but a decision made without force. Ethan's fingers closed gently, not holding, just meeting, the same way he had met the bull, the same way he had met every moment that had led them here. The simplicity of it settled over the yard like a final truth. No cheer followed. No celebration broke the silence. Because what had happened did not belong to the crowd. It was not something they could take part in or turn into a story of winning and losing. It was something quieter, something that asked them to reconsider what they thought strength looked like. Niyeli's eyes softened fully now, the last edge of distance gone, replaced by something steady. Something chosen. "You did not take what was offered," she said. "You let it choose you." Ethan gave a small nod, his voice barely above the wind. "That is the only way it means anything." The bull moved a few steps away, calm, unbothered, as if its part in this had already been completed. The rope lay still, forgotten entirely now, a piece of the past that no longer held power over the present. Niyeli glanced once toward the horizon, then back at Ethan, her grip steady, certain. "Then you understand what comes next," she said quietly. Ethan looked at her, not questioning, not resisting, but not assuming either. "Only if you do," he replied. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full, carrying everything that had not been spoken, everything that did not need to be. And somewhere in that quiet, something shifted beyond the two of them, something the crowd could feel but not yet name, because out here, the rarest thing was not a man who could stand his ground. It was a man who knew when to leave space for something else to stand beside him. The wind moved softer now, carrying the quiet weight of what had just been decided, not declared, not claimed, but understood. Ethan did not tighten his grip when her hand rested in his. He did not pull her closer, did not turn toward the crowd as if expecting anything from them. He simply stood, steady as before, letting the moment remain exactly what it was. Niyeli watched him for a long breath, her fingers still in his, feeling not strength, not possession, but something far rarer. Absence of need. And in that absence, something stronger had taken its place. Behind them, the men who had come for spectacle stood without words, their boots planted in the same dust that had once carried their laughter. No one stepped forward. No one challenged what they had seen, because there was nothing left to challenge. The bull had moved farther into the open yard now, head low, calm, no longer carrying the tension that had defined it. It did not look back. It did not need to. The rope, half buried in the dirt, lay still, forgotten by everyone except the wind that slowly covered it grain by grain. Niyeli's gaze followed the animal for a moment, then returned to Ethan. "Where I come from," she said quietly. "A man who listens is trusted more than a man who wins." Her voice carried no edge now, no test hidden beneath it, only truth. Ethan nodded once, his eyes shifting briefly toward the horizon before settling back on her. "Where I come from," he replied. "Most men forget that." A faint breath of something like a smile touched the corner of her lips, small, almost unseen, but real. She took a step beside him, not in front, not behind, but next to him, her hand still resting in his without weight. The space between them no longer needed to be measured. It had already chosen its shape. The crowd began to shift then, slowly, uncertainly, like men waking from something they did not fully understand. One by one, they stepped back from the fence, their eyes lingering not on the bull, not even on Niyeli, but on Ethan, as if trying to carry something away with them, something they could not quite name. No one spoke. No one tried to explain what they had seen. Because out here, some things did not belong to words. Niyeli turned slightly toward him, her voice lower now, meant only for him, even if the wind chose to carry it farther. "You walked into this place with nothing," she said, "and you leave with nothing taken." Ethan's gaze held hers, calm, unwavering. "That is the only way anything stays," he answered. The words settled between them, simple, final, like a truth that had been waiting to be spoken for a long time. Niyeli studied him one last time, not searching now, not questioning, just seeing. Then she gave a small nod, the kind that does not ask for approval, the kind that marks the end of something and the beginning of something else. She released his hand, not pulling away, just letting it fall naturally, like a moment that had already fulfilled its purpose. Ethan did not reach to hold it again. He did not need to. The connection remained, not in touch, but in understanding. He turned then, slowly, his boots pressing into the dirt as he walked toward the open land beyond the yard. No rush, no hesitation, just the same steady pace he had carried from the beginning. Niyeli watched him go, her posture straight, her expression calm, but her eyes followed him farther than the others did. The bull stood quiet behind her. The rope lay buried, and the crowd, now silent, made way without a word. Because out here, the strongest man was not the one who stayed to claim what he had earned. It was the one who knew when to